Press record now. So feel free to ask questions during the presentation. I'm going to introduce Finn and Andrew from Urban Equation in just a minute, but kind of introduce Building to Net Zero a little bit. So the Building to Net Zero project from ICLEI Canada supports small to medium-sized municipalities in the adoption of frameworks that advance local building energy performance. BNZ, or Building to Net Zero, works on building local capacity and helping to overcome barriers for these communities. We've chosen this topic today because Canada's 2020 national model building codes have been adopted by many provinces and territories now. And so municipalities, provinces are really starting to think about what that means and how to advance from tier one to the upper tiers. And this session is really going to highlight some of the trade-offs with net zero buildings and some of the benefits, as well as some of the things that maybe will improve as technology improves. So with performance, comfort, and equity, and we'll get into that in just a minute. So housing has been such a huge priority in this country recently with the affordability crisis, with recent federal and provincial announcements across the country. And so really, this is something that is very relevant to today. And so I'd like to introduce Finn McDonald and Andrew McDonald from Urban Equation. So they're here to speak about the business case for high performance housing today. And so they've been working on us with us as our consultant, working with 13 municipalities, our 13 cohort municipalities on this project. And they've really done a deep dive into the business case here. So take it away.
Financing agreement or something. Yeah.
Thanks, Nathan. And I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get going. Right, is that good on your end, Nathan? You see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I feel like sometimes this is like speaking into a vacuum when you're doing a webinar like this. You can't always see everybody's face, but I can see 5 of you lined up right here. My name is Finn McDonald, and I've got Andrew here with me who'll introduce himself in a minute. We're here to introduce or present the business case for high performance housing, and not just housing actually, because we also did a couple of archetypes for commercial or civic. So in terms of the presentation that we have for you today, we're going to start with a project overview. So a little bit of information about the project and what we did. We'll also introduce you to the whole project team who's not here with us today, because it wasn't just Urban Equation, it was also our partner, the EQ Building Performance, that helped us deliver this work. Andrew and I will both tag team the financial impacts portion of this presentation. So we'll talk about the upfront capital costs that developers see. And we're really going to be focused on the energy efficiency things, right? It's about energy and energy cost reduction, energy use reduction, and emissions reduction. We won't be looking at broader things like green development standard stuff. It'll just be focused on energy performance. We're also going to talk about market research. So we did look into the availability of different technologies within the cohort regions, and we have some high level results from that, as well as some key takeaways. And we'll also gently get into some of the health impacts. So what are the health impacts of combustion and some of the health benefits of net zero? And the technologies that we use can really help improve those outcomes. And lastly, we have some final thoughts just to sort of hammer home some of the things that we want you to think about when you leave here. So let's get started. So the project team, my name is Finn McDonald. I'm a senior consultant at Urban Equation. I was the project manager for this project. I'm joined today with Andrew McDonald, who's a consultant here and looked after the life cycle costing elements of this project. We also have 2 analysts on the project, Shreya Agarwal, who looked after the market research, and Sarah Hassan, who was responsible for the health research. And then on the EQ Building Performance team, we had Nafisa Nawala and Adam Barker, who helped us with the energy modeling portion of the work. And while we didn't do energy modeling specifically, we did have a number of energy models from Natural Resources Canada that we processed and pulled out data from. So more on that later. So what was this project? Well, the Building to Net Zero Business Case project studied three aspects of higher performance housing and buildings. So we looked at the financial impacts, the upfront capital costs that are spent by the developers, and then the operating cost savings that are realized by the people who live or operate those buildings. For the local market conditions, we looked at the availability of different materials in the supply chain, nationally and locally, and the availability of the local workforce. And then for the health impacts, we looked at health and air quality benefits for residents who live in those buildings or in the communities those buildings are in. So let's get started with the financial impacts. I think this is the part that I think most people are the most interested for, and it's where the meat of this presentation and report is. So let's just frame this study for you. So we compared the upfront building costs and the long-term energy cost savings across different performance levels. So we had two main questions. How much does it cost upfront to build better? And how much do occupants save on their energy bills over time? So those are the two questions we were trying to answer. In order to do that, we needed to decide what baseline was and what a good building was and what a better building was. So luckily, we were able to lean on the National Energy Code for Buildings 2020. So the baseline building is a building that would meet those basic code requirements. We used Tier 2 of the National Energy Code for Buildings, which is a 25% improvement as our mid-level performance. And that's roughly what you would expect from a building that would be built to, say, LEED Silver or LEED Gold, right? A fairly energy efficient building. We also had a net zero ready performance level, and we chose to use Tier 4 of the National Building Code for that. So that's a 60% improvement over the National Energy Code for Buildings. We did look at 7 different building types. So for homes, we used detached single-family homes. We used 2 townhomes, an end unit and a middle unit. For large buildings, we had 2 multi-unit residential buildings, a large one and a small one. And we also had 2 office buildings, a regular office and an institutional office or a civic office. So when you think about how many different types of buildings and 13 cohorts, that if you multiply that out, that's like 90 permutations of buildings, right? So we had to get really efficient at how we did this study. So there are some limitations, in order to cover all those building types, those regions, those climate zones, we were able to leverage the work that Natural Resources Canada has already done creating the code. And they created a number of energy models which were available for us to process. But it's important for you to know that while we leveraged models that existed, and those models did have changes from the different climate zones, we didn't actually do any design ourselves as part of this study. So there's always further optimization that can be done to really dial in on those energy cost savings. One of the limitations of this study is we were picking models that already existed from a number of iterations that NRCan had done during the code development process within all of those tiers, but we weren't able to fine tune them. So they are optimized for climate zone based on the models that are available. Climate zone is important because when we look at climate zones on a map, and I'll show you this in a minute, the more heat that's used over the course of the year, the higher the number of the climate zone, right? So our buildings within the same climate zone, our single family homes within the same climate zone, were always the same. The same with our offices within the same climate zone, they were always the same. They changed when we jumped from one climate zone to another. The other thing that's important to know is that the energy consumption and the corresponding energy costs that are spit out of these models, they're based on the schedule of operations within the code itself. So the code says if there's this many people, this is how they behave, right? So people behave how they want to behave in reality, but when it comes to the code, you have to follow their list of prescribed schedules. So it is a possible outcome. It may not, if somebody moves into the house and installs a hot tub, they're not going to see these energy costs, right? So it's important to note that it's based on on the code. So for the costing methodology, for the large buildings, we were a bit more sophisticated. They are more sophisticated buildings. So we created the baseline costs using the Altus price guide. So Altus is a costing consultant. They produce construction cost guides every year that talk about the average cost of construction across a number of different building types in a number of different cities. So it's per square foot. We used the midpoint in that range. Typically, in an urban area, we might find the high point in that range is more accurate. For this study with the cohorts that we had, we had a lot of rural areas. The midpoint was seemed to be like the right number to use. We also didn't include underground parking in these archetypes, so it's just the building above ground, and that also seemed to fit best with the rural mix of the types of places we had. So in terms of the cost premiums associated with the different systems, so as we went to tier 2 and tier 4, we were able to get information on the different changes made to those buildings right out of the energy models from EQ Building Performance. Our team at Urban Equation was able to cost those changes using the RS Means costing database. So it's a piece of pricing software that has costs for different components, including the installation for a number of different cities across the country. For the really expensive items, we cross-checked those against our own internal cost database. So Urban Equation is part of the Windmill Development Group, and Windmill Development is our sister company, and they develop projects. So we have a lot of experience developing net zero, and we have a costing database which shows the cost that we had actually paid for things like heat pumps, geothermal, high performance windows. So for some of the more expensive items, we determined that our cost database was actually more accurate, and some of the costs in RS Means might have been a little lower. So in order to be as accurate as possible, we did override some of those costs with our own market experience to be more accurate. Now for homes, the costing was a little bit simpler than that. So again, the baseline costs were from the Altus pricing guide, but when it came to the cost premiums, we were able to use the Natural Resources Canada Housing Technology Assessment Platform, which connects directly to the RS Means database and pulls pricing out. Now, we did do some checks of some of that data, and we were satisfied with the heat pump costs. So we didn't need to override any costs as well. None of the houses or townhomes used geothermal. It was all air source heat pumps or cold climate heat pumps. I mentioned climate zones earlier. This is a map. You can see if you go all the way west down to Victoria, Vancouver area, you will see a little green dot. That is climate zone 4. That's all we get. Climate zone 5 is the orange. That's parts of southern Ontario, the very southern tip of Nova Scotia, and parts of western BC. Most of the country is in climate zone 7, climate zone 6 rather, which would house a lot of the major cities. Climate zone 7, things are starting to get really cold, and that's where we see the prairies, Winnipeg, Regina, Edmonton, parts of Calgary. I'm pretty sure Calgary is split between climate zone 6 and 7. And then when we get into climate zone 8, that would be the high Arctic. So we didn't have any climate zone 8 in this study. We also didn't have any climate zone 4. So climate zone 5, we had cohorts in Ontario and BC. So all of the buildings for those cohorts are consistent within climate zone 5. In climate zone 6, there was other areas of Ontario, but we also had Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick. And then climate zone 7, we had Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So just to give you an idea at a high level of the energy efficiency measures that were used to improve the performance and reduce the carbon emissions. So the homes, whether that be detached single-family homes or townhomes, the code buildings, the baseline always had natural gas heating, and then everything else was prescriptive as per the National Energy Code. When we got to tier 2, it was a full switch of that gas furnace for an electric heat pump. And in pretty much all the cases, that was all that was done. To get to tier 4, the 60% better then, that's where the heat pump efficiency was improved, envelope improvements happened, it was Energy Star equipment, there might have been some other small efficiency adjustments as well. But for the larger buildings, the mid-tier was a little more complex. So we still started with natural gas heating. When we got to tier 2, we actually went to a hybrid electric heat pump with gas backup. So this had a heat pump system, but also a gas furnace for the colder days, and then improved the ventilation efficiency. And when we got to tier 4, that's when we really got into things like improved windows, reducing the size of those windows, connecting the heat pumps to a geo exchange or geothermal loop, and then equipment, efficient equipment and sensors, automation, and things like that. So tier 2 was a light touch, tier 4 was a deep touch. So and with that, I'm going to pass it to Andrew, who's going to take you through some of the results before he passes it back to me for the other parts of the research.
Thank you, Finn, and thanks for such a detailed breakdown as to our methodology, and thank you to the audience for being here today. So here to reveal our findings in terms of the financial impact. What surprised us, I suppose, and perhaps the audience will find it surprising, was building to a higher tier, especially tier 2, is a fairly marginal increase in terms of the capital costs paid by developers. Obviously, that's dependent on a variety of factors, but in most cases, it's a low single-digit increase. So you'll see tier 2 is quite achievable in terms of the additional capital cost expense. And as you add in those layers Finn mentioned to reach tier 4 with the geo exchange loop and some more complicated building automation and sensors, those costs can increase. But I wanted to show the next slide that kind of displays these incremental capital costs as you increase in tiers across the colder climate zones. So you'll notice that none of these costs are, outside the realm of possibility for developers. As it gets colder, obviously you can expect the cost to achieve these tiers increases, but it's well within the realm. And we just wanted to display all the climate zones and all the cohort members so everyone can kind of gauge where they were. But at the end of the day, it's an up and to the right, but not a massive leap by any means. So on the next slide, I just wanted to zoom in and show what that incremental increase translates to in terms of the operation savings for either the building occupants or the building operators. So you can see in Climate Zone 5 in Ontario and British Columbia, a 1% increase in capital costs leads to a nearly 50% energy cost savings annually and over the lifetime of the building. So it's a fairly simple switch. I'll caveat this by saying as we go into the colder climate zones, it becomes slightly more complex and it's not an instant translation into savings. But what we can see here is that the payoff is quite remarkable. So I just wanted to show on the next slide as well how that translates across the other archetypes, not just low-rise residential or multi-unit residential. But you can see building to these higher performance tiers leads to between a 25 to 60% energy savings across all the large archetypes. And that's a very positive finding in our opinion, and hopefully makes a compelling case. And just moving on to the next slide, you'll notice here some of those caveats about the climate types and the energy sources. Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, the two cohorts that we examined were using fuel oil as a method of heating. So obviously fuel oil is very expensive. So the switch to electric recognizes a larger cost savings than say in the prairies, climate zone 7, where natural gas is quite abundant. So moving to that second tier build isn't, you don't realize as much as those energy savings as you would hope. And then with those envelope improvements Finn mentioned earlier in the presentation, you begin to see those paybacks with the improved envelope. And the same observation carries through to an archetype that's probably more relatable for most folks. So single family and townhomes, we much of the same findings. So reaching that tier 2 is anywhere between a 2 to 7% increase across a single family home, a townhome on the end, or a townhome in the middle. And then, as you look to achieve those envelope improvements, as well as the cold temperature heat pump, the cost increases again marginally. So just showing that on a wider scale. And again, this chart and the next slide is going to be relatively familiar and simplistic, but as you can see, we're looking to achieve those higher building tiers, but the cost is not a significant jump. And then when we carry through to just look at how that translates to energy savings in the next slide, you'll see that tier 2 doesn't necessarily yield as much of improved energy savings as tier 4. And as Finn mentioned, this due to some of the limitations of the studies and as many permutations as we did. Tier 2 really for the residential homes was swapping out a natural gas furnace for a heat pump. So in some climates, as we'll see in the next slide, that doesn't always necessarily translate to energy savings if not done correctly. So as we can observe here in certain climates, in Ontario and climate zone 7, as well as you'll see in the prairies, switching over to an electric heat pump actually increases your energy costs because you're dropping the natural gas, which is relatively cheap, and you're switching to a heat pump to heat your home in the thick of winter without improving any of the walls or windows. It actually leads to an increase jump in price. However, as Finn mentioned, you can design for this to address this without going to the completely next tier. So these figures can be improved. And just moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to walk through the key technologies that we used in these models to develop these results. So heat pumps, obviously everyone's very familiar with, but as well as geothermal, heat recovery, ventilation, air tightness, and improved insulation, improved windows, building automations and sensors, energy star appliances, and LED lighting. And as Finn will allude to further along in the presentation in terms of the market research, these technologies are really dependent on them being available in the market as well. So that's also something to keep in mind as we are developing a business case.
Thanks, Andrew.
I have one more slide just to finish it off. Sorry. So I know there's a lot of charts and numbers and tables, but if there's one takeaway just from both the large archetypes as well as the residential, it's that developers face a marginally higher capital cost to build to these performance tiers, but occupants actually stand to realize significant energy savings over the lifetime of the building. And as Finn will get into the market research portion, the market conditions and the energy costs will impact the feasibility and achievability of these results. So just a couple of observations is that the upfront capital costs are borne by the developers, and the energy costs are passed, or the energy cost savings, I should say, are passed on to the occupants or owners of the building. And then the difference between the gas and electricity rates are going to have a significant impact on those cost savings. So if the price of electricity is much higher than the low cost of natural gas, you're not going to see you're going to see a diminished cost savings. And then as we learned with the residential models, simply switching to electricity is not always going to improve your energy savings without those envelope improvements. And lastly, one way to address some of that is maybe looking into a hybrid heating system. So, using a heat pump in the shoulder seasons, and then having a natural gas furnace for the deep cold in the winter. But with that, I'll let Finn continue to explain a little bit more with the non-financial impacts as well as health benefits of the business case.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think that last point, the hybrid heating solutions, is one that's, it's particularly important when we think about the difference in the results we saw between the large multi-unit residential buildings and then the single family homes, whereas in the large multifamily, we had modeled hybrid heating solutions for tier 2, but in the single family and detached, there was just heat pumps modeled for tier 2, and a heat pump uses a coefficient of performance, which is a function of the outdoor air temperature. So the colder it is, the less efficient that system is going to be. And they do really struggle when you don't have good insulation, right? So that perhaps replacing the furnace with the air conditioner isn't the right approach. It's replacing the air conditioner or replacing the furnace with the heat pump is not the right approach, but replacing the air conditioner with the heat pump so that you have that gas backup when you can't address the envelope. But obviously addressing the envelope is the preferred approach because it does eliminate all those emissions and keep costs down. So let's dive into the market research portion of the work now. So we obviously know that the costs are going to vary across the country. When it comes to the cost difference between one rural area and another, it's really difficult to predict those costs with any certainty because if you've ever tendered anything, the price isn't the price until someone bids on it. So it really is a function of how busy they are too, right? So what we wanted to do with the market research portion of this work is to assess the current market availability of some technologies by evaluating the suppliers, both locally and nationally. So we did look at 4 technologies that were present in the buildings that we modeled. So heat pumps, geothermal drilling and tubing, high performance insulation, and high performance windows. Those were things that were on the previous list you saw. We also added solar PV to this, and while net zero ready buildings don't use solar PV, net zero ones do. So we felt it was also important to look at the availability of that technology as well. So in terms of our methodology, so we mapped out local jurisdictions and we were looking for things within a 1-hour drive. We did check with different societies to figure out what a good travel distance was, and it does really vary, whether you're urban or rural, and it's not uncommon for people to drive further than that in some rural areas for work. But we kept it to 1 hour to be consistent. So we counted within that 1-hour radius of each of the cohorts the number of suppliers for each technology, and then we gave a diversity score based on that. So the red would be 1 to 3 suppliers. I guess it's the orange would be the medium, 4 to 6 suppliers, and then high would be 6+. So the table you see shows the cohort members in a list, and then there's different row or columns for each of the technologies. You can see heat pumps scored quite well in terms of their availability in most of the cohorts within an hour drive. For geothermal, that was the other end of the scale, right? So there's medium across the board. Very few scored high, High performance windows were quite good. High performance insulation a little bit less so, and then renewable energy was spotty as well. So when you think about the things that could really be improved, I think geothermal drilling and renewable energy are high on that list. High performance insulation and high performance windows are not as high tech. So you would expect that they would be a little better, but still the availability is not great everywhere. So in terms of the key takeaways, so there is a lot of variability, and that's going to have an impact on the price and availability. So there were market leaders, heat pumps, high performing windows. There were also emerging technologies like geo and solar. For those on the call, there's opportunities for us to build the local workforce, which could stimulate growth in supply in some of those low coverage regions. And the way we do that is by encouraging those technologies, either through mandatory codes or through incentive programs. And even heat pumps, where we saw pretty good coverage, there was a lot of suppliers. There's still not enough suppliers to supply everybody, right? So we used a diversity score that maxed out around 10 suppliers, right? So we need a lot more than that if we're going to supply everyone with heat pumps and have technicians able to show up for service when it's needed. So there's still work to be done in order to build those markets. Let's move on to the health impacts now. I have a couple slides on this. It's a complex topic, but we did summarize it quite simply. So net zero buildings can address health impacts, either ones associated with combustion in particular, through a number of different avenues. So front and center, we've got reduced combustion. Obviously, if we're not burning things, we're not polluting. But there are also pollutants that leak as a result of that too. So natural gas leaking into your space can also be dangerous. So net zero homes minimize combustion. They get rid of furnaces, they get rid of gas stoves, they get rid of gas fireplaces, and they replace it with things like electric heat pumps, electric or heat pump hot water heating, and induction cooktops instead of gas stoves. And I have an induction cooktop. I love it. In terms of ventilation and filtration, so net zero buildings will use heat recovery ventilators or energy recovery ventilators. This allows fresh air into the space, and that's really important when you talk about sealing the buildings up, right? And if you look at the details of the energy efficiency measures we used, the higher tier always involved some level of infiltration improvements, so making the building more airtight. When you do that, you can end up with a buildup of heat and moisture. You need to be able to ventilate in order to control mold and other things in the space. But when you do that, you get continuous fresh air. Most homes, older homes, are ventilated through the walls. You don't have your windows open in the winter times. You get fresh air because the house is leaky. If you plug that up, you have to get fresh air somewhere. And when you do that, you can add really high quality filters, which can actually filter out things like viruses, particulate matter, wildfire smoke, other contaminants, right? So you're going to lock yourself in that box. You can have fresh air when you're in there. If you're going to do that, you also have to take into consideration what you bring into that home. And I think this is not something that you would typically think about when you think about net zero buildings, but low VOC paints, coatings, and sealants, volatile organic compounds are materials that vaporize at room temperature and give off a gas that you can breathe in, and it's not good for you. So paints, coatings, sealants. There's also chemicals in the glue that's used in furniture. So making sure that those materials are not brought into the building is a great way to control that pollutant, and it's something that's more important on net zero buildings that are airtight. Residential heating in Canada does favor combustion. You can see in this chart here, predominantly natural gas. There are other fuel types too as well. So heating oil, we did see in some of the cohorts in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. There are a lot of rural areas that use heating oil. There are a lot of rural areas that use propane. and there's even diesel. So wood is also really popular in places like the Maritimes and BC and northern New Brunswick, where the pulp industry is so strong. You see electricity is 27%. What you're probably seeing there is electric radiators. You're not seeing heat pumps. So that's a really inefficient way to heat a home. If we can get off that combustion, we can reduce those pollutants. So there's the number of pollutants that are associated with combustion, whether it's carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, that end up inside our home or in our communities. We spend 90% of our time indoors, and there's 300 annual deaths in Canada attributed to carbon monoxide alone. So it's not just for energy savings, it's for our health. Those pollutants also have a number of impacts. So they can cause respiratory effects, irritation, asthma, or nausea. There's cardiovascular effects, so the risk of heart attack and stroke. You can have toxic exposures such as carbon monoxide poisoning, and there's even safety hazards. So I mentioned earlier, if you have natural gas leaking into your space, and there's always a little bit of leakage, but if you had a major leak, that could be a real safety hazard. So let's circle back on some final thoughts before we open it up for questions. So the first thing I wanted to say was we have to make heat pumps the first choice. If you show me a better technology, I'll show you a better way to use it. But right now, heat pumps are the best chance we have in decarbonizing our buildings, reducing energy costs, and improving health in our communities. So they provide low carbon heating. They don't need combustion. They also provide resiliency because they allow for cooling. So places like I'll use BC or Calgary as an example, Vancouver or Calgary, places that didn't typically need cooling. Now they have all kinds of wildfires. So they're indoors, they close their windows and it gets hot in there. So adding cooling is a resiliency measure, and we are going to get hotter, which comes as no surprise. Climate change is going to mean places that didn't traditionally have cooling are going to need it. So adding a heat pump does allow cooling for those residents as well. Heat pumps save money, especially during the shoulder seasons, and we need to build those markets now. So even if you can't go full electric, if you can't go all the way to tier 4, a hybrid system that gets a heat pump in your building will help build those markets we talked about, give jobs to technicians, and we can start upskilling for the jobs of tomorrow. The next thing is to push the envelope, and that's really what it takes to get to the next tier. So improved envelope, they give us those cost savings that we aren't able to get with heat pumps alone. They also provide an enhanced thermal comfort and improved health and well-being. I mean, if you've ever sat next to the window in an office tower, you know, it can be full of glare, it can be, the radiant heat can be terrible. But then when the sun goes around the other side of the building, you're cold, right? So improved envelopes make us more comfortable in our space. They make us more productive. They also, when you pair them with proper filtration and low emitting materials, they can actually protect indoor air quality too. Because like I said before, older buildings are ventilated through the wall, newer buildings are ventilated through ventilation systems with filtration. So some practical steps that can be taken. Conduct air tightness testing and look for easy wins. You know, I tell this to small scale residential developers all the time. If you do a blower door test and smoke machine, you can find some quick leaks and seal them up with some caulking. For bigger projects, you know, reconsider the window size and the placement. Our development team at Windmill has been building high performance envelopes at almost no cost premium because we use smaller windows placed in the right places. Windows always perform better, or always perform worse rather, than walls. They're essentially a hole, right? So the smaller the window, and the more wall you can have and the better efficiency you can have. And windows are expensive, so the smaller they are, the less money you spend on them. And lastly, ventilate with improved filters. And you know, everyone on this call today could stop at Home Depot on the way home and get a better filter for their house and start filtering out smoke particles, particulate matter, viruses. It's cold and flu season, COVID-19 season. So they do have filters available at Home Depot that you can replace in your standard furnace that will filter out virus particles. So easy things you can do. And if you have a thermostat that is sophisticated enough, you can even control when the fan runs. So you don't actually need a ventilation system. You can just run all the air in your house through your furnace filter. And that's it for the presentation. So if there are questions, I'm sure some have ended up in the chat.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Finn and Andrew. That was a great presentation. We have a ton of questions actually in the chat, so I'll get to those in just a second. So today we're just going to jump into questions and we're not going to go to breakout rooms. And feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask any questions in person, which will be recorded. Otherwise, I'll ask the questions in the chat and keep you anonymous. So let's go back up here and start with one. On the slide for the building costs, is that a percent increase in total building costs or just the building energy system costs?
It's the total cost, but we layered the system costs on top of the Altus price costs. So it's a function of both of them.
And then have another one here. And interested to know what window you use for lifetime of building, 50 years, 100 years.
In the analysis we did, we were more interested in the annual cost savings, but we did model out a 20-year life for the financial model. And that was just so that we didn't have to get into replacing mechanical systems. A building is going to last a lot longer than that. A mechanical system, you probably get 20 years.
Next, we can go to Melanie. I see your hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to ask the question about the recommendations. You said first heat pumps, then envelope. I'm in PI. We're having the problem where we pushed heat pumps and not envelope, and now we have some problems with the electricity grid. We're having potential blackouts. We're just pretty much on the verge of that, I think. So I'm just wondering, did that come into the consideration when you were looking at like all of those studies?
Well, normally I would say if your building has cooling already, you could replace the air conditioner with a heat pump, same size, and not have any net impact on the grid. If you're in an area that didn't already have cooling and you start adding mechanical heating and cooling to the electrical grid, you need to compensate for that with distribution upgrades and generation upgrades. I don't think there's a way around that. I guess efficiency is always cheaper than adding new capacity on the grid, though. So that's what programs like Efficiency PEI and Efficiency Nova Scotia and whatnot have been doing for years. But that is the tricky thing, right? And I live in a very grid constrained area of Ottawa, and I can't get any additional electrical grid capacity to put a heat pump in. So when I do it, I have to size it the same as my air conditioner.
Yeah, thanks, Finn. Another question here in the chat. Did you model components only or also component construction and installation, like the real world installation of that? Or just the theoretical, if you if you put in a window, did you use, that they might not install it 100% perfectly, or did you use those just those R values that would come with the specification sheet?
Yeah, we used the specifications. We didn't make any adjustments like that.
Yep. Beyond percentage savings and uphold investment figures, would it be possible to report financial metrics in net present value or internal rate of return? Someone's curious about the overall cost effectiveness.
We do have that information. We didn't put it in the slides. Yeah,
Yep, thank you.
It will be available for the cohorts.
And did you provide, can you provide examples of the brands and models used in the report, especially for hybrid heating solutions?
So there weren't brands or models used. It was just sizing of equipment. So kilowatts for the size of the heat pump. It wasn't, we didn't pick specific brands. we wouldn't typically get into that sort of thing unless we were doing a Class B cost estimate, which would be far more detailed, where we'd be reaching out to suppliers and identifying the exact products.
And then building off that a little bit, I think you already answered this, but how are high performance materials and components qualified? Certification through a third party, R value, airtightness.
Yeah, so we use specification sheets. So within the models that were done for NRCan, there would just be a U value for the windows or an R value for the walls. We didn't actually identify specific products to get there.
Yep, thank you. Keep the questions coming, everyone. Lots of good questions there. If you can go back to slide 28, are the proportions based on the number of households or units of energy?
This one,
Yeah, that one.
it would be on the units of energy. Yes.
And did you account for radon in your assessment of health impacts?
No, we didn't.
Yep.
Sure.
Yeah, good questions, everyone. Keep them coming. In costing the electrified scenarios, did you include secondary costs? For example, increasing the size of electrical service and distribution, or only focus on the core equipment?
For the larger buildings, we did, based on Windmill's experience. We did use sizing of the equipment within the building, sizing of the exterior equipment, like the distribution stations and things like that at the grid were not included. So I know sometimes if you're retrofitting and there isn't capacity, those costs need to go in. We only looked at the cost within the building. And then for the smaller homes, townhomes, we didn't at all factor in service upgrades.
And did you model energy performance based on standard filters or a high MRV?
I don't have the answer to that off the top. I'd have to talk to EQ, unfortunately.
Yep. And another comment on the order of operations. I guess if you could just speak a bit more about order of operations versus envelope first versus heat pumps first.
Yeah, I mean, good design would look at all of those things at once. I think if you can't do them all, I would say the single biggest impact you could have is switching your air conditioner for a heat pump so that you have the ability to run it in reverse during the shoulder seasons. But you know, a building works as a system, right? So designing and honing in on the exact energy savings and carbon reductions you need is the right way to do it. We weren't able to do that with the 90 some permutations that we have in this report. So these models that already existed, right? But I wouldn't say that there's an order of operations per se, but I will stand by that the big win that you can have, and I tell this to residential builders all the time, is just to stop putting air conditioners in and start putting heat pumps in instead.
Yeah, that's really good advice there.
And when it comes to residential builders, we talk about changing the envelope. If you do more than just upgrade the windows, you start to talk about changing the way they're building the wall, which is a big change for them, right? Dealing with their trades. So it's less comfortable for sure.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then just kind of thinking more broadly about there's many municipalities and communities on the call here. Kind of what advice would you give in people kind of starting out with maybe some creating some more guidelines or even standards around building and building energy use? Do you have any more advice on that?
Sorry, what was the question?
Just yeah, if you have any, there's lots of communities and municipalities here on the call. And would you have any advice on communities starting their journey towards, building green development guidelines, or whether they, are kind of wanting to go down this path but aren't sure where to start?
Yeah, I'd start by talking to the developers in your community, right? They're the ones who are you're going to have to partner with them and to get anything done. Um, it's way easier to work with them than against them. So talk to them about how they build, talk to them about what your goals are, see where you can, find common ground. So a lot of them may have goals of their own. So that would be my first piece of advice. I think my second piece of advice would be to try and understand what it is, what are the big challenges in your specific area? Or is it a lack of supply of a certain type of product or skill, and how can you get more of that in your area?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. There's lots of sort of competing opinions and thoughts around new buildings, and really, having everybody at the table will make a big difference. Um, I got time for a couple more questions here before we end at the top of the hour. If anybody has any last minute questions, now's the time. Um, Otherwise,
Yeah, I have one
yeah,
quick question
go for
before we
it.
end here. Um, just wondering if like there's any kind of guidance for how one might use this report to engage with developers, and if you have any advice for how we might use that.
I think that this report is a great place to start the conversation. And, this level of costing, like I said, we didn't do any designs. We leveraged existing models. So it's a good place to say, this is what we think. Now, how can we work with you to figure out what it means for this building right here? Which is going to be more detailed than what we looked at in this study. But it's also going to be more real. So I think that it's important to use this as a way to start the conversation and work towards building the business case for your own project. And if municipalities are taking this report to the development community, you can say, this is what we think. Can you tell us what you think?
Rick, yeah,
Yeah,
thanks so much, man. This is a really, really exciting report. So yeah, thank you a lot for all the work you've put in on it.
yeah. It sounds like so many people in the chat are excited to read the report. And I guess we'll just close on if you have any sort of last summary thoughts you wanted everyone to kind of know about what to kind of grab when they see the report.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at these numbers for a long time, and they are improving. And I think, especially the first step is a lot smaller than it used to be in terms of getting partway there. And that is because of increased availability of some of those technologies like heat pumps. I think that we can get all the way there. And I mentioned things like changing the size of your windows, being one thing you can do to like envelope improvements with little upfront capital cost. Our development team at Windmill has also been experimenting quite successfully with utility service agreements for geothermal. So taking those upfront capital costs and spreading them out as operational costs so that you don't have to bear that big cost of drilling. You set up a utility and you sell heat, and you get a financing partner, and all of a sudden that huge upfront capital cost becomes long-term operational cost that's equal or less than natural gas, right? So there are creative solutions to these things where we can use to bring the costs down to marketable prices. And our development company at Windmill only builds net zero buildings, and they do so at a profit. So it is possible, but you really have to work at it to figure out um, what those business decisions and business case things look like for you, and optimize it. And every time you do it, you get a little bit better at it.
Great. Well, yeah, well, thank you, Finn and Andrew, for the great presentation. Thanks to everyone for all the tough but interesting questions, and really appreciate everyone being here today. So see you next at the October Building to Net Zero session on October 30th, same time, 2 to 3 Eastern. And yeah, Have a great rest of your day, everyone.